right. Well, hello, everyone. Owen Giles here. I want to welcome you to Ministry to Muslims, Making Jesus Known, Twin Cities. Welcome back to our training. I have with me today Al Fadi, and he really needs no introduction, but Al Fadi is a Christian convert from Saudi Arabia, and certainly, in my opinion, one of the top Christian apologists today. I have had the great pleasure of calling him Professor. But it's just an honor to have him with us today. I'm not going to take up any of his time. He is going to speak to us today on the topic of the dilemma of the two Qurans. Brother Al Fadi, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Olin. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I'm sorry that I couldn't make it in person due to some technical issues with the airliners and weather and all that kind of stuff that took place yesterday.
Well, we had a little technical difficulties, I guess, beforehand there, but we praise God for technology, and we are able to have you. And I'm just going to turn it over to you at this time, and I'll be backstage if you need me. Just let me know, okay?
Yeah, I just want to let people know that because we were not able to upload the slides that I'm going to be sharing, I will be sharing my screen, and it's in two parts. The first part, once it's done, if we still have time, I'll jump into the second part and we'll go from there. So if I need any assistant, I'll holler at you. And also, I assume you'll be keeping an eye as well on what's going on. So let me go to sharing basically my screen, and we will go from there. And hopefully we can find, I remembered I need to open the PowerPoint first. So let's do that. There we go. So I hope that everybody can see now the presentation. So today's topic, as Olin mentioned, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Jay Smith, and also I want to thank Dr. Daniel Brubaker, because I relied on information that they have prepared previously, information I'm familiar with, of course, but I want to give credit to their work. Some of the slides here are mine, but I use the same format that Dr. Jay Smith is using, simply just to keep it consistent, and therefore it doesn't cause any confusion. With that in mind, I wanted to show, hopefully, our Muslim audience that would be watching this at some point, either now or later, and our broader audience in general, and also our Christian audience who are reaching out to our Muslim friends, that when it comes to the Quran, this notion that we have only one complete, perfectly preserved book starting from the 7th century until today, in modern day, is nothing more than a fiction. And I say it with a broken heart because I know my Muslim friends are really sold on this idea without even taking the slightest opportunity to reason with the evidence. So today we're going to present facts and evidence that will diminish this fiction that is called a perfectly preserved textbook. Now, right, like I said here, I want to give thanks to Dr. Jay Smith and Fonder Films for allowing me to use some of their material with my own commentaries. Now, of course, all of these animations is the work of Dr. Jay Smith, who loves animation, and we love him for that. So here are some of the attestations that the Quran makes, or the claims the Quran makes about itself. The Quran says it's an uncreated book, and it existed for all of eternities in the so-called preserved tablets. Okay? Then the Quran also said that it was sent down. And of course, how was it sent is up for grab, and there's so many debates about that. The most common traditional view is that it was sent down from heaven to earth through a mediator, and that's the angel Gabriel. Although, by the way, the Quran doesn't tell you specifically that it was an angel called Gabriel by name is the one who brought down the Quran to Muhammad from heaven. But of course, our Muslim friends are going to show you verses to claim that this is what it's saying about Gabriel. But I would argue that you cannot find a single verse that clearly and succinctly and directly mentioned Gabriel as an angel by name in that verse, stating that he brought down the Quran. And then, of course, the Quran claims that it's complete book, obviously, and the Muslims believe it was a complete book. But of course, they would argue that it was formally became a book that is complete in the 7th century under the leadership and reign of the third caliph, Uthman. These are some of the claims that basically you're going to hear from our Muslim friends. And with that comes this caveat that it hasn't been changed ever since. All right, let's take a look now at some of these claims and what does that mean. Okay, I'm trying to basically move from here, and here is the first thing that we're gonna take a look at. Because the Quran, of course, makes these claims about itself, that's why Muslims in general are convinced that those claims that we just shared with you, or others like them, are real. The Quran in chapter 85 says, "This is a glorious Quran inscribed in the preserved tablet." That in chapter 10, verse 15, it says, "Bring us a Quran other than this or change it. It is not for me to change it on my own accord," meaning it's protected by Allah, spoken by Allah, and therefore no man can change the word of Allah. The Quran is filled with passages like this, by the way. Chapter 18, verse 27 says, "And recite what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord." That's in reference, allegedly, of the Quran, although it is not clear here, but the context, according to Muslims, apply to that, or the commentaries later, of course, 300 plus years later, they began to apply interpretations like this, because you can argue that the book was applied to the Bible also in the Quran itself, but it's saying none can change his word. I will show you that actually a lot of people have changed his word, but let's continue with our journey here. And here's another verse where it says, "Verily, we," meaning Allah, supposedly speaking about himself in plurality, "it is we who have sent down the Quran, and surely we will guard it." I would argue the word dhikr, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra," the dhikr, the remembrance, that's the actual literal translation of the word. So in chapter 15, verse 9, it doesn't say the Quran. This is basically one of the ways the Quran is corrupted by the translations itself into other languages, where the translators give themselves the liberty to add words or use words according to the common theme by the commentators. Okay, let's keep going from here and take a look at other things. Here is how the Quran talks about how the Quran itself was revealed. So these are the stages of revelation of the Quran. First, it was preserved for all of eternities in the preserved slates or the preserved tablets. Okay, from there, in the night of power, or Laylatul Qadr, Allah decided that he's going to send it down. The argument is that he sent it down from the 7th heaven to the 1st heaven. Okay, that's the common interpretation of what that meant. And then from there, it wasn't really dumped as one book all at once, but rather it was piecemealed over the course of 23 years. There you go. Chapter 25 of the Quran states that. And then Allah ensured it's the superintendence of collecting the Quran. And with that comes the idea that it was protected, preserved, no changes are made to it. Well, I tell you, by the time we finish, you should fire Allah, because he failed miserably at all of these categories. All right. So here is one of the works that Dr. J. Smith have done. You probably have seen it in his channel. You've seen it on my channel, because he and I collaborate a lot. Where do we get this idea that the Quran was finally and formally collected as a book during the reign of Uthman? Well, long and behold, you have to go to the Hadith, and specifically Hadith Bukhari. Couple of actually traditional basically citations in there by Bukhari about the story. And the problem with that is that Bukhari's collection took place almost 240 years later, or at least he died 240 years after the time Muhammad. So let's say about 200 plus years after the time Muhammad, where Bukhari allegedly reported this. But it gets even better. You can't find a single manuscript of Bukhari to prove even Bukhari wrote the hadith until at least 500 years later. So the problem is actually amplified. If you want to archaeologically speak and present facts and evidence, then you're going to have a real problem proving that whatever Bukhari says about this even was written 200 years after time of Muhammad. So you can see how the problem keeps just multiplied and amplified here. And here is also another challenge. You've heard Dr. Smith mention it. You've heard me mention it many times about this alleged 7th century Quran that is complete, 100% identical to today's Quran, preserved and protected with no changes, and so on and so forth. The claim, that's their traditional claim. And by the way, you know, if you go to my channel, we have been talking about problems with the dating of the origin of Islam in general, problem with the dating of the origin of the Quran itself or its compilation, and of course the man, Muhammad himself. But let's stick with the traditional view. The traditional view that stated that after Uthman authorized and superintended the collection of the Quran around basically 552 to 54 AD, give or take, almost like 20 years after the time of Muhammad, that he made copies and sent these copies to the provinces under his leadership. And here we have yet another problem. What do I mean by that? Well, the traditional view says it's 4 different basically provinces plus 1, meaning he sent 4 copies and retained a copy for himself. So you can argue it was 5 copies, but his personal copy plus the other 4. Now, where can we go and find accounts about this? Well, Nolaki, for instance, talked about so many opinions out there about this, but Adani is the go-to. That's the Muslim scholars' favorite to go to. And sadly, some of the Western scholars who are Islamists focus on the studies of the Quran somehow buy this claim basically without any attempt to refute it or any attempt to try to directly expose the fact that this is just one opinion by one man that existed hundreds of years later, and we don't even know how did Adani accomplish this feat, and how did he even reach this conclusion, and why do we have to believe that it was the correct account? So you can see all of those basically alleged copies. Okay, so you can see more of that. Now here's look at the cities down here. You have Medina, allegedly that's the copy of Uthman. Mecca, 1 copy. Basra and Kufa in modern day Iraq. Damascus in modern day Syria. That's where we get these 5. Okay, so I'm gonna show you now a book called The History of the Quran, Quranic Text, and it's authored by a very well-respected Islamic author by the name of Al-Azmi. Here is what Al-Azmi's account, you'll find this in his book. Here's what he stated about those claims. He says, how many copies did Uthman distribute? According to some, notice, some reports, 4. They were sent to Kufa, Basra, modern-day Iraq, and Syria, that's Damascus, with the last one being kept in Medina. So the 4 includes Uthman's own copy in Medina. Then he says another account adds the following cities: Mecca, also in Yemen, and in Bahrain. Added up, that's 7 right now. Adani favors the first report. Big deal. Big deal that Adani favors the first report. Well, I favor the second report. So what? Does that mean that my opinion really rise or stands or somehow becomes binding? I mean, just because Adani stated it doesn't mean a thing. We have to look at what is being reported here. Then there is another Egyptian professor that existed during the time of the Ottoman Empire in Egypt, at least in the early days. His name is Shawki Daif, Dr. or Professor Shawki Daif. Shawki Daif. He believes, however, that 8 copies were made because Uthman retained 1 for himself. So that means there's 7 plus 1. In support of this, we know that Khalid ibn Ilyas, he's reporting about somebody, Khalid ibn Ilyas, made a comparison between the Mus'haf, that's a reference to the Quran, kept by Uthman, and the one prepared for Medina. Al-Yaqubi, who is a Shia historian, says that Uthman sent Mus'hafs to count Kufa, Basra, Medina, Mecca, Egypt, Syria, Bahrain, Yemen, and Al Jazeera. That's mean the Arabian Peninsula. That's a total of 9. Of all these localities, however, there are 5 that are more consistent in all of these reports, and that's Mecca, Medina, Kufa, Basra, and Syria, which is the first basically round. So technically speaking, nobody knows how many of these copies were made, how many of these copies were disseminated, and how many of these copies literally belong to that tradition, because the surviving copies that are claimed that could be traced back to Uthman don't match and don't look even identical in terms of the style of writing, orthographically speaking, some of the contents, and the list can go on and on and on. So folks, you can see the problem with what is going on. So here is a historical basically overview of where the qira'at. Now we're talking about another problem. So the first problem that I shared with you is that we don't have a handle on how many copies were made by Uthman, and if indeed they were made during his reign, and if indeed they were disseminated to these basically regions or provinces under his leadership, and if indeed whatever is claimed to be Uthmanic actually could be, historically speaking and factually speaking, traced back to him. And if you compare them to each other, you begin to have some variations. And that's where the idea of qira'at or variant readings pops up now, which, by the way, was solidified and actually was made official, the 7th reading, during the time of Ibn Mujahid, which would have been 300 years after the time of Muhammad. But that's for another discussion. Now, there are certain ways you can look at the evolution of the Arabic text of the Quran itself. Okay? Now, if you look at many of the early Quranic manuscripts, when we say early Quranic manuscript, we're talking about the first 200 years of Islam, by the way. I want you to begin to remember that. Early Quranic manuscripts, first 200 years of Islam. So starting from the 7th century all the way to the 9th century, technically speaking. For the most part, when you look at them, you are going to notice that they don't have dots or diacritical markations for distinguishing consonants, and also vowel markations, and at the same time, any other marks that distinguish certain basically grammatical needs for it, or even dots that will create the so-called versification or verse endings, and the list can go on and on and on. Now, you may find a dot here or a dot there in some of these early ones, but most likely some of these dots also could have been added at a later time. Somebody went back and added these dots. In some cases, you can really clearly see that that was the case, meaning those done earlier. Now, I want to give you a crash course on understanding at least the traditional dating of Quranic manuscripts. When it is slanted like this, as the one that is called the Sana'a manuscript, those are called the Hijazi or the Mile, it's usually earlier. When it is basically having the letters actually vertical, or even if it is Kufic, which, by the way, the Hijazi is a form of Kufic anyway, but it would have been the primitive one or the early one, then it would be at a later. So this could be 7th, late 7th, early 8th. This could be 8th and after, meaning the Samarkand one. All right. And also the dottings, less dottings, few dottings, that's early, more dots and more uniform, basically dotting conventions, that will be a later dating. Now, why are the dotting important? Because if you look here at the Arabic alphabets, okay, the Arabic letters alphabet, you're going to see that only a handful of these letters don't require any dots. Okay, the alif, the kaf, even though the kaf has a hamza sometimes, which is missing in the early ones and later was added, the lam, the mim, and the ha. Okay, the rest of them I can see, these letters, by the way, the ba, the ta, and the tha are triplets. So having a dot is important. The other triplets, Jim, Ha, and Kha. The twins, Dal and Dal. Ra and Za, Sin and Sheen, Sad and Dal, Ta and Dha, Ain and Ghain, Fa and Qaf. You see where I'm going with this. Singular, Noon, and also you have as well the Ya. Although the Ya has a twin letter, by the way, the letter is the Alif Maksura. Without the dots, it becomes like the letter A or A when you read it. Okay, Ila. Okay, Ila compared to Ilay. Okay, Ila has the Alif Maksura, Ilay has the Ya. So all that to say is that those dots become important. Now, you can see by looking at the Quranic manuscript or early Arabic that there has been an evolution in the system used to distinguish between these letters. For instance, you can look at the letter Fa. Here, the dot, one dot above the letter. In some manuscripts of the Quran, you see the dot below, actually. And the letter Qaf, you have two dots above. That's the commonly used one today. But in some early Quranic manuscript, you'll see one dot above. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that there has been a system that kept on evolving, and many attribute the beginning of that system to Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'ali, and then you have others after him, but some argue that the system existed even far before ad-Du'ali, but he the one who kind of like formalized it. Whatever the case might be, those manuscripts, for the most part, are inconsistent in using these letters. The ones that I'm studying right now, I'm studying a handful of them, they don't have consistent system or convention that is being used, which means some letters are up for grab. You can really read it one way or another, and you can come up with a different meaning for it. Here is why they're important. Look, one dot means noon, two dots mean ta, one dot, third dot means tha, one dot below could be ba, two dots could be ya, and the list can go on and on and on. So which one? Yes, the context. Some will argue memorization help. That's fine. But if someone didn't have a clue about how to read it, they can actually end up reading it in a different way. And sometimes it sticks. The reading could stick because it makes sense and it still applies to the context and it's acceptable reading. This is why we have the so-called the different variant readings of the Quran or the Qira'at. On top of that, we have another problem that was missing in early Quranic manuscripts, or at least formally missing. I've been studying some of these manuscripts, and I would argue that there appear to be signs of evidence of attempts to come up with systems to allow the vocalization of these words. These are called harakat. Those are for the voweling. Okay, so we have fatha or short vowels, fatha, kasra below, dhamma. As you can see, it's almost like a short wow in Arabic. So this one will be u sound, e sound, sound. Okay. So it helps with the pronunciation, and it helps also with the proper grammatical application to it, and therefore it makes a difference in how it can be interpreted at times. Okay? Now, without these dots, just one example, if you look at, we read, of course, Arabic from right to left. If we look at the rasm, we call it rasm without dots, that's the structure of the word. The structure of the word. Then you start adding these dots below and above. Look how many words you can come up from the exact same rasm, and it evolves from noun to a phrase to a adverb to a verb, and the list can go on and on and on. You can see why those are important.
Al-Fadi, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your PowerPoint is not running. I don't know if there's anything that you can do. We see the 3 slides like it's not started.
Well, brother, I'm not really sure what else I can do. I don't want to take this, but I'm seeing everything moving from here at my end.
Okay.
All right, maybe I'll stop sharing. I'll start again. Let me do that. So let's go back again and share now. How about now?
It's showing 3 different slides. It's different than it was before, but it never moved before. It just stayed on.
Okay.
Those three.
What are you seeing now?
I see the two slides on the left. It says 30 official readers and transmitters.
Okay,
Hops.
so it's what you're saying is it's not showing the presentation mode, and
That's
it's
right.
stuck at
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I don't know what to say, brother. Unfortunately, all of the efforts that we put right now didn't work. I wish I knew that. Yeah.
I just wanted to make you aware of it.
All right, we're gonna stop sharing then because it doesn't make any sense to do it that way. So nothing is working, unfortunately, at you guys' end for whatever reason. So we'll keep going here. The third, we have something called the canonical readings. Of course, you've heard us talk about, myself and Dr. Jay Smith, and sometimes Dr. Jay and his own channel with others, the so-called the 7 readings. But of course, later 3 were added, it became 10, and then 4 more were added later, much later, and became the 14th. Those are the acceptable, at least, readings by the Islamic or Quranic scholars of Islam. The first, the 7 is the so-called ahruf, of course. Those were formalized by Ibn Mujahid almost 300 years after the time of Muhammad. And from there, we get what we call the readings of today. The readings of today, the known as the basically Hafs from Asim, which is a Kufan reading, actually. A Kufan reading, not necessarily a Medinan or a Meccan reading, for whatever reason. Okay? So every reading or every reader will have 2 transmitters, meaning 2 students that learned from the reader, memorized it, and transmitted it orally. Maybe even they wrote some of that, but you have to have harakat in order for you to, or dactylical marking, to be able to pronounce it correctly. So all that to say is that the one that is very popular today, known as Hafs, he died in 796 AD. When did Muhammad die? 632 AD. Do the math, 160 years at least later. And this is the one that became very popular when? 1924, folks. 1924 AD. Let me repeat the date. The year that the First World War ended and the Ottoman Empire collapsed, 1924 is the year that this reading became very popular in the Islamic world. At least the majority of the Islamic world, with the exception to North, Northwest, and West Africa. Okay? Other than Egypt, of course. You go from there, from Libya, all the way to Morocco and Mauritania, and you begin to see Warsh is the most common in there. Okay? So if you think that's a problem, then you thought correctly. And also, of course, if we were to take the 7 plus the 3, that's basically 10 readers. For every reader, we have 2 transmitters. We have 30 different Qurans. That's where the number 30 becomes basically important. Now, it gets even better. There is a gentleman in the 70s, got his PhD from St. Andrews, and he was a student of John Burton. Okay, John Burton was his advisor, and did his PhD on something called the 2 transmissions of the Quran. It was a doctoral dissertation at University of St. Andrews. And his focus was in the so-called the Hafs reading and the Warsh reading. On page 19 of his dissertation, he stated the following. He says, corresponding in some ways to this historical progression, meaning the progression of the readings and the printing and the dissemination of the official Quran, the printed Hafs copies fall today into 5 traditions, folks. Not one Hafs, 5 different Hafs, actually. One is called the Iranian tradition. One is called the Indian tradition. And one is called the Turkish tradition. That's the Ottoman one. And one is called the Egyptian tradition. I would argue it's influenced by the Ottoman one as well. And then we have the North and West African tradition. Even Hafs have variations. So it's not even a consistent one. So that's another dilemma. when it comes to these so-called two Qurans. What do I mean by the two Qurans? The traditional Quran that is perfectly preserved Quran that is identical to today's Quran, and the Quran that has all sorts of holes in its narratives and problems. Okay? And we've demonstrated so far that we have problems with that Quran in terms of its collection, in terms of its dissemination, and now in terms of its readings, and the list can go on and on and on. And of course, I would love it if I can at least share this with you guys. So I'm going to attempt one more time. I'm going to attempt really one more time to try to do a screen share to see if it works this time. So let's go to this slide one more time. I'm really hoping that it will work. Are you guys able at least to see what I'm seeing, even if it is 3 slides? Daryl, can you tell me, Brother Olin?
Yes, sir. We got them.
Okay. Very good. We'll keep it this way then. So now, of course, this is the infamous picture that Sister Hatun, of course, by the guidance of our Lord, she discovered that there are so many different Qurans, and of course, she began to collect them. We're up to 37 so far. Each one of these Qurans have variant readings in it. Don't tell me they're identical, please. I'm not that really naive. A word that is read differently is a different word. Okay, that's logical way of concluding. And here's an example of that. You have the Hafs, the most common one right here, versus the Warsh, which is the one in North Africa and West Africa. Okay, Hafs, majority of Muslim world. So the word qatala, okay, in Hafs for this particular verse, qatala, in chapter 3, verse 146, meaning fought. Okay, fought. And qutila, so one in the active, that's in Hafs. In the passive, was killed or were killed in this case. How can you tell me they both mean the same thing? Seriously. I mean, just if I give it to you like this and I say it's not the Quran, just tell me, do they mean the same? No one in the right mind, grammatically speaking, can tell you that they're both the same. Here is a second example. This one, I'm going to use Dr. J. Smith way of responding. This one created so much havoc in the Muslim world when myself and Dr. J did a quick video on this. And he asked me, he says in Hafs reading, it says Al-Bariya, but yet in Warsh, it reads Al-Bari'a. How would you interpret the word Al-Bari'a? I said, Al-Bari'a, well, obviously it's the word for innocent. Now, the Muslims were up in arms. In fact, Dr. Shabir Ali, bless his heart, he did a 1-hour show on this. And Farid Answers, bless his heart, he did another mocking videos about this. And they missed the point completely. The point is this. If you were to give the word Al-Bari'a to any Arab speaking, what would come to their mind immediately? And the word innocent is what they would think. Right there, you can see that you have a problem. You have a problem because they're going to interpret it in the most common way. Oh, they said, you have to go to the Arabic, basically, encyclopedia, and you have to look at the commentaries. Well, if I give it to somebody on the street, are they going to have access to all of these documentations? And especially if they don't speak Arabic in the first place, we have examples of Muslims that don't speak Arabic. How in the world are they going to know this? Look, come on, folks. Let's be fair, okay? We need to be fair and we need to be honest with ourselves, but that's okay. And then, of course, you have the most famous video. You can go on Google, of course, and Fonder Films. And here's the 26 Qurans were presented for the first time at Speaker's Corner. And look at the reaction you get from some of them Islamic, apologists like Muhammad Hijab, who was calling everybody to come back and leave the platform. Why? Because it was so damaging. It was so much damaging. And Muhammad Hijab, we really want to thank him from the bottom of our heart for inviting Yasser Qadi to his live stream on June 8th, 2020, the day that goes down in infamy, to be honest, the day where Dr. Qadi admitted that the narrative of the Quran has holes in it. Okay, the standard narrative of the Quran has holes in it. You can go and watch this, of course, in Fonder Films and other channels, because they pulled down the full video, by the way, because they don't want this embarrassment, because it caused so much havoc to Dr. Yasir Qadi. How dare he admit that the Quran we have in our hand today has holes in its narrative? Rightfully so, he did admit the truth. Here is another scholar that probably some of you haven't heard of his name. His name is Dr. Shabir Ali. This is what he says about the variant Qurans. He says, listen, today, most Muslims read the Quran in a text that is referred to as the Egyptian edition of 1924. Remember the date that I gave you, folks? He says that's how scholars refer to it. So it's a scholarly term. Most Muslims may not realize that this is what we call today the Quran. But this is not the only text of the Quran that is read throughout the world. In North Africa, there is a slightly different text and a slightly different readings. And then he proceeded to say there are some with slight variations. And in some parts of Africa, there is another reading of the Quran and a matching manuscript that is prevalent. And here too, we find some slight variations, folks. So please don't panic. It's only slight. You see what I mean? All right, let's keep going. Now we look at what we call the earliest surviving partial manuscripts. We're not talking about full Quranic manuscript that match today's Quran. They each have their own issues. And these are the ones that are found in Topkapi. I saw it with my own eyes when I was there. Samarkand, that is found in Uzbekistan. And then you have also the so-called Ma'il that is found in the British Library. It's known as OR 2165. And then you have the Petropolitanus in Paris, in France. And there is a number of families in there. You have the Arabi 328, the Arabi 330G, the Arabi 331, and the list can go on and on and on. Those are found there. Now, I'm going to give you another crash course when it comes to Quranic manuscripts. If it is slanted in its writing with also not standard or vertical, that's early. Very few diacritics or dots, early compared to later. Very few versification or enhancements or ornamentation, that's early versus later. Here's another one. The larger, monumental like this is later. The lesser ones that are not monumental, they're earlier. So there you go. You guys have a crash course already on understanding Quranic manuscript dating. Here's what I mean by that. Now look at this. This is an example here where the missing alif, the was added at a later time because originally it wasn't written, and you have to rely on probably traditional reading or memorizing and understanding that this is how it's read. Because you can read this as as-siddiqeen without the alif, okay, or as-sadiqeen, okay. As-siddiqeen could apply to those who tell the truth. As-sadiqeen, who are righteous people, okay. So, and also telling the truth, obviously, but because they're righteous. Here is, it was added. How do I know it's added? It's in red, folks. You can't miss it. And this is what we call versification, the ending of the verse. You can tell it was added at a later time. It wasn't there originally. So somebody decided where you have to stop the verse. By the way, verse endings can vary also from manuscript to manuscript and from also traditional Qurans that we have today. And the list can go on and on and on. Here's an example. This one comes from the so-called the E20 manuscript. You can see that somebody took the time here, which, by the way, the one that I just showed you also from E20, they put the so-called the ornamentation, the separation between one verse to the other. So this one at the top is the end of chapter 9. This one at the bottom, the beginning of chapter 10. In fact, they write here, they tell you Yunus and Mea wa Tis'at ayat, meaning 109 verses. This is the one at the bottom. And you can see that somebody took the time to try to fill the gaps. Initially, probably it was a gap, or This is a copy that was done later, and therefore they're doing some enhancements now that evolved over time. Now, this one, look at it at an earlier Quranic manuscript. You see, there is just a gap. You don't see this. There is just a gap. Also, another thing, notice there is the red letters right here, like this is ayat, verses or signs. Look at it right here. There is no such thing at all. This is the word right here. It's missing the alif. Just an example of these kind of things. So to summarize, basically, none of the Quranic manuscripts that we have can be dated back definitively to a 7th century. Some will be later 7th, some will be after. Some of the dating actually, carbon dating can take it before the days of Muhammad, technically speaking. But the most important thing is none of them are 100% complete and identical, I would add, to today's Quran. None of them completely agree with each other. This is, by the way, I want to give credit to Dr. J. Smith that these are his conclusions. And none of them completely agree with the current 1924 Hafs text. By the way, Dr. Brubaker, when he discovered some corrections that were made to the Quran, he argued that it looks like it was a reverse engineering process where they took it from later and make it look like earlier, technically speaking. All right. So I'm going to stop right here, folks. I'm going to give you 10 minutes and I'll be back again with another presentation called Understanding the Muslim Mind. And now that we understood how the format works this way, we'll make sure that next time we'll do it this way. So I'm going to stop right here, brother.
All right. Thank you so much, Al-Fadi.
No problem.
So you're just going to take a 10-minute break and then come back?
We will. And if people want to ask questions, they can hold on until the next session and they can probably ask my questions then. Very good.
Sounds good. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with Understanding the Muslim Mind. Is that correct, Al-Fadi? I'm pretty sure it is.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Hello, brother.
Hello.
All right, I'm ready. And again, apologies for that mishap. I wish we tried it the other way. So right now, I'm gonna do the exact same format that I just did that worked with the slides.
Okay, yeah, we could at least see them move that time. It looked like to me, I mean, I could be wrong, but it looked like to me that maybe if you went up to the top and hit begin presentation.
Okay, I'll try it right now if I can see it.
Okay.
Yes, that will make sense. Let me go ahead and try this first that you just shared with me.
Okay.
And indeed, if there is such a thing as a shared presentation, start presentation, I mean, then that would be great. So we'll do this, share.
All right, I see your PowerPoint.
But I'm not seeing something saying start presentation. That's why.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just go with that. It worked. I mean, we can see your slides. We can see the other slides on the left there, but at least that way they can see them. So, brother, we just again appreciate you being here with us and taking the time to do this. Very, very much looking forward to this topic, understanding the Muslim mind. So I'm going to turn it over to you once again. Thank you, brother.
Yes, Olin. Also, just if I get closer to my cutoff time, I'm assuming it's 45 minutes. Please
Yes.
feel free to alert me or send me a text message or something like that.
Okay, sounds good.
Very good. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Once again, this is Al-Fadi, and thank you so much, of course, for joining me in the first session about the dilemma of the two Qurans, and hopefully the message was received about what I meant by two Qurans. And now we are going to talk about something totally different. I want to call it the psychology of the Muslim mind, and I don't say it in a way that may appear as if I am mocking. Rather, I am. Really, I say it with a broken heart. My family is still Muslim. My best friends are still Muslim. My cousins are still Muslim. And a lot of wonderful friends of mine are still Muslim. And I would love for them to know the truth and be set free and come to know the Lord and follow Him. And that's true of anyone who does not know the Lord, whether they come from a religion of Islam or other faith-based, basically, beliefs. They're all somehow, one way or another, there is something about the psychology of their belief that prevents them from making that leap of faith, if you wish. So let's take a look at certain things that I developed myself. I don't want to make it sound like it's approved by a psychologist or something that is endorsed somehow somewhere. These are my own research. This is my own work. And I hope that you will find some benefit of it. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we are going to go from there. So give me a second here, folks. We're going to try the upload the files option first. And if that works, that would be really great. Looks like it's going to work. And I'm just waiting for it. It's in the spin zone at the moment. If any of you have any questions from this session or from the previous one, I'm assuming that my time is 45 minutes. So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes towards the end. You can type your questions in the chat, and therefore I'll take a look at them, and hopefully if time allows, I can address all of them. But if not, I will at least address some of them. We're still waiting for this presentation to work. I'm going to give it another half a minute. If not, we'll do the other route, and therefore we don't have to waste any of our energy. I'm just going to scroll up. There you go. Looks like it is there. And now it's much cleaner this way, and everybody can see it. Okay, so we're going to keep going here. Now, I want to just have a disclaimer. Anything that has to do with the origin of Islam, the dating of Islam, anything I talk about is basically based on what we call the traditional dating of Islam. In other words, there has been some problems now with the origin of Islam, the dating of Islam, and everything else, and even the location of that. But all that to say that some of these actually still apply. All right. So any way you look at it, whether Islam started it in Mecca or started it up north, as I believe, even there up north, it would have been through nomadic group of people. Sometimes they were called the Ishmaelites, sometimes called the Hajarites in reference to Hagar. And they have other names as well, the Sassaniyat and all that kind of stuff. All of that comes from a nomadic area, desert area up north. So this applies that we're dealing with Bedouin. We're dealing with people who lived in the harsh desert environment. We're dealing with tribal mentality and sectarian mentality and hostility, stubbornness, ability to endure, and so on and so forth. This is a look at some of these areas. I'm referring to this region right here. Still is known, by the way, the Roman Empire called it also the kind of like the wilderness of Arabia, if you wish. And this is what I'm referring to. And even if it came from here, let's hypothetically say the traditional of Islam are true, still we're dealing with tribal mentalities, people who lives in nomadic tents. And this is the desert, the sand dunes. I saw this with my own eyes. Beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. People go sand duning, by the way, in there, just like they do it in other parts here in the U.S. I've seen people living in these tents, and there is a caveat. Sometimes you would see a pickup truck outside. Sometimes you would see a BMW covered or a Mercedes as well. So there you go. That's what we're dealing with. The main thing about Islam, by the way, is that it is a religion that encompasses all aspects of life. It encompasses, social setting, culture, politics, the whole community at large under the basically the banner of Islam. So you do not, in the Muslim world, you do not separate between church and state, if you wish. No, everything is one. All the decisions that are made that are one. I'm going to use a most classic example right now. The Iranian conflict with Israel has nothing to do just with politics only. It has to do with religion and beliefs that are driving those decisions in terms of how this hostility has to be instituted against the perceived enemies of Islam. So religion is a big deal when it comes to that. Now, here is another thing that I wanted to add to that. The honor and shame worldview is extremely prevalent and extremely important for the most part in the Middle East and the so-called Arab world. Now, you would find shades of it in other parts of the world, but Islam, represented by a lot of people who come from that basically mentality. The Arabs at least come from that mentality, and many Muslims throughout the world look up to the Arabs, by the way, and kind of like try to adapt to their way of living as representative of Islam, because in their mind, the Prophet of Islam is an Arab, came to the Arabs and spread it to the rest of the world. Poetry would be also another important element. In fact, I would argue that the Quran, for the most part, and Dr. Andy Bannister did his dissertation on that, it would have been a poetic performance or an oral performance conducting the Quran that way. So poetry is important. That's why you find big parts of the Quran has the poetic form of delivery, and Muslims think that those are the Meccan ones. They're short, they're poetic, they rhyme, and so on and so forth. Okay, we'll keep going here. Here's some things that I want you to be aware of. When it comes to the reality of the Muslim person, it's immobile. Okay, they're stagnant, stuck in one place. They basically bought into some of the characteristics of the pre-Islamic gods, whether they know it or not. For instance, the idea of idol worship. What do you think Muslims do today? They face Mecca. They face a shrine that is made by man. That shrine has a man-made stone known as the Black Stone. They run between two rocks. Basically, they stone Satan. I mean, all of these are forms of idolatry, regardless of how you think. And some of these practices and rituals were practiced by pre-Islamic Arabians. So right there, you can see a connection between the two. When it comes to their thinking and reasoning standpoint, they tend to be biased, subjective, not objective, emotional thinkers. How often do you see people emotionally refuting, not necessarily factually refuting? So you have to reason with them, no doubt. But at the end of the day, these are the characteristics of the people you're dealing with, whether they know what they're talking about or not. They tend to be uncritical thinkers. Okay, you can talk to a Muslim who is very well educated, has 1 or 2 PhDs, but when it comes to matters of faith and trying to refute the teachings of the Quran or Islam, all of a sudden they become uncritical completely. Irrational, dogmatic, narrow-minded, stubborn, doctrinally rigid. Just a few descriptions of what we are dealing with. Now, here's another look at it. And sorry, by the way, sometimes the text spacing takes some of the letters and put it down. By the way, this is how the early Quranic manuscripts, you'll see like a word is chopped at the end and they take the remaining letters and write it at the beginning of the next verse. So I'm trying to mimic that, I guess. So you have the core teachings of Islam. And then from there, people can vary in terms of their tradition, Shia, Sunni, basically Baha'i, Sufi, and the list, Ahmadiyya Muslims. And then how they apply it is based on their own teachings and understanding. And even among the Sunnis, there are variant schools. And in the Shia, there's variants, like, for instance, the Twelvers, the ones that believe in the 12 Imams in Iran, their theologies are more rigid in certain areas than, for instance, the Ismaili, and so on and so forth. So you really have to know which Muslim are you dealing with, what is their background, what is their upbringing, how knowledgeable are they, how dogmatic are they about it, and are they that equipped and also learned when it comes to understanding everything about Islam? And that's really a dilemma. In other words, not every Muslim is identical to the Muslim you just spoke to before or after. It's not a cookie cutter approach. That requires patience, requires building relationships, requires loving them, requires reasoning with them, sharing the truth with them in love, and trusting the work of God and the Holy Spirit. This is why we have movements like the Insider Movement, who thinks like all Muslims are the same and invent their own theology and try to impose it because of the frustration with the fact that they know they cannot really deal with one Muslim at a time. All right. So here are some ritually Muslims stand on money borrowed dogmas, like the idea of the unity of Allah, borrowed from other beliefs, praying towards a temple, borrowed from other beliefs. Daily, when I say the Jews, by the way, the Jews are not commanded to do so, but the Bible does talk about the fact that some of the Jews would face toward Jerusalem and they would pray, not necessarily because they believed really that that's something mandated to them. So somehow it was taken and applied now towards temple. These are some of the reasons why the Jewish thesis of the origin of Islam and its influence on Islamic rituals becomes important, by the way. Daily prayers, dietary, laws and all that kind of stuff. And especially the understanding of how paradise might look like, Zoroastrianism applied to that. And if you study Christianity in the Quran, it's mainly heretical form of Christianity that shows the influence of cultic, heretical forms or Christians in the Quran, and the way the Quran understood what Christianity would look like. For instance, you talk to a Muslim about the Trinity, they think of 3 gods because that's what the Quran says. Maybe there were Christian cults that believed it that way. I have no idea, but not necessarily the idea that that's what the doctrine of the Trinity, biblically speaking, is speaking about. All right. Now, here is really idolatry in Islam in a nutshell. Everything, the claim that's connected to Abraham, because the belief is that Abraham and Ishmael migrated from north to south to modern day Mecca, build the foundations for the city itself, and also build the Kaaba. And there is something to prove the existence of basically Abraham, known as the Abrahamic station, but all I see is rocks. That's all I see. And historically speaking, archaeologically speaking, no one can prove that Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael ever made it there. All right. Here is the Abrahamic station. The Quran actually asks Muslims to pray by that station. It's part of the rituals and earning good deeds. And these are allegedly the footprints of Abraham. All right. So if this is not idolatry, I don't know what you call it. And I love Muslims, by the way, Muslim scholars. They're not bashful about their faith. Somehow in Christianity, we tend to take years before we are open about our faith and sharing about our faith. Why don't we be bold like them, actually? Why aren't we bold? They're bold for the non-truth, and we are bashful about the truth. So we need to learn how to exhibit our lack of shame of the gospel from day one. A simple thing is you thank him at the end of a meeting and say, can I pray for you in Jesus' name? There you go. They know now that you're a Christian and you are a follower of Jesus. Why can't we do this? Look at what this scholar says. Back in 1981, Zaki Badawi says, Islam is a proselytizing religion, cannot stand still. It can either expand or contract. Islam endeavors to expand. Okay, that's the goal. Islam is a universal religion, not a local one. It aims at bringing its message to all corners of the earth. That's the gospel message right there, my friend. It hopes that one day the whole of humanity will be one Muslim community. That's the kingdom. What you see, Satan borrows all of these biblical truth and applies it to different teachings. Islam bought into these kind of claims and applied it to itself. All right. And the list can go on and on and on. Now, let's take a look at some of the world views when it comes to Islam. You have to understand these world views, by the way, in order for you to be effective in sharing with them and understanding of the reactions as well. They learn by observing, they learn by imitating, they learn by listening, and they learn by repeating, they learn by memorizing things, and so on and so forth. Just look at the Gospels. You know, you see examples of this. They're event-driven, not task-driven. Here's what I mean by that. If you meet with them, please put your calendar aside and don't work with the regimented start and finish time. It doesn't work that way. You meet with them, then expect to last in that meeting for hours. Okay? Cancel your calendar. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The other thing is, if you invite them, be patient. They may not show up exactly at the time you expected them to show up. Don't be frustrated because that's offensive to them. So you have to really think of it that they care about the relationship more so than the task itself. They tend to like stories. That's why Jesus used parables and stories all the time. Okay? They value and learn information handed down. How many times Paul mentioned that? I passed on to you. I handed down to you, what I received. So he's talking to people who understand what that means. They value traditional solutions. This is why sharing the gospel with them, they're going to compare, okay, how many of our people accepted Christ? Oh, if you're from Saudi, that's unusual for somebody to be a Christian because what handed down to us is Islam. That's our tradition. You see what I mean? You're going to have to think of how they're thinking. Understand things in their context. Okay? They understand things in their incorporeal way, not necessarily in an individual way. The decisions they make are not individualistic. They think about the ramification of my decision on my entire group, family, and tribe and country. My sister told me, you shamed us. I said, how did I shame you? I made a decision for myself, but I know what she's talking about. But that's how people think about it. All right. I'm going to skip over this. And here's just a quick analysis and comparison between a Western culture that is more on what is called the guilt and innocent worldview versus Middle Eastern culture, which is more on the honor and shame. Individual rights emphasized in the West, group rights emphasized in the East. Individuals make decisions in the West and are responsible for their own decisions. And in the East, the group influence that decision. Task-oriented in the West, event-oriented in the East. Guilt-oriented, you can share the gospel by talking about breaking the law and sinning. It doesn't work with a Muslim who comes from a shame and honor. You have to talk about how Adam and Eve brought shame upon themselves and dishonored God. You talk about it differently. It's the same gospel, hasn't changed, but you have to really find the right way to sharing it with them. Rule-based, relation-based. Even when you break the rule in Eastern culture, you rely on relationship with authorities that they can really look the other way. That's what I'm trying to say. So here, Jesus is your go-to in the East, right? I can have a relationship with Jesus, and Jesus will talk to the Father, and the Father will look the other way if you believe in what he has done. You see what I mean? That's how beautiful the gospel can be articulated to them in a way that can make sense to them. So I'm going to keep going here. And this is just a glimpse on what I'm talking about in terms of the worldviews: honor and shame, guilt and innocent, fear and power. All right. So let's keep going here. Here is a look at the honor and shame scales. For instance, a local gentleman that I love, his name is Werner Mischke, focused on the honor and shame, and he came up with these categories: West on the left side, East on the right side. West focus on equality, East focus on hierarchy. Okay, West focused on direct things, talks, conclusions, decisions. Indirect. Okay, and here, example, they ask Jesus a question, he gives them a story. Indirect way of responding to it. Okay, individualistic in the East, not West. Group oriented in the East. Task versus relationship. Risk takers in the West, cautious in the East, including making a decision about the gospel. What would happen to me if I accept Christ? If a Muslim from the Middle East asks you that question, they got it. They understand that they need Jesus. Now they're processing the risk involved with all of that. All right. So we're going to keep going here, folks. Now let's look at one of the most psychologically bearing and damaging to the mind of my Muslim people, sadly: fear, the doctrine of fear. Islam, by the way, is presented in a variety of basically descriptions. It's called the religion of peace. Now, not necessarily what the Quran says. Justice, sacrifice, submission. That's the real meaning of Islam. Community. Okay. However, the word fear, in my humble view, represent what Islam is all about. And I'll show you why. Now, there are layers of fear that Muslims deal with. For instance, you have the fear of Allah. All right. And I'm afraid that my coffee is going to get cold. So that's another fear. Then there is the fear of hellfire, fear of authority and the punishment. Punishment like what? Against apostasy. Fear of God causing life affairs to get messed up if you are doubting him, having disasters, cancer, accidents, loss of finances. All of that they attributed to punishment from God versus what we call spiritual warfare. Fear of just the idea of being open-minded and trying to speak out your mind because you're being censored. Look at how many Iranians, sadly, right now are being thrown in jail because of daring to stand up for democracy and also changing the culture. Fear of the West, and the idea, what I mean by that is like, oh, the West is influencing our sons and daughters. Look how they dress up. Look how they talk. We need to isolate ourselves from them. It's the West. Why? My sister says that you became a believer. Really? What does the West have anything to do with this? Christ is from the East, actually. But that's how they attribute it. Of course, the government fears the West in terms of like CIA spies and all that kind of stuff. Like how many people in Iran right now are thrown in jail and even executed with this trumped up claim that they are Mossad operatives. Okay, so I mean that's how you see real life. Now, if we were to take Yusuf Ali translation in English and just focus on the word fear in there, we have about 296 times in about 269 verses, almost like the ratio of almost like 1.1 per each verse. All right. And on top of that, there are other words that insinuate fear as well. Things like talking about the punishment in the hellfire and the form of that punishment, boiling in there, the agony you're going to feel, the pain you're going to experience, and so on and so forth. Okay. You add all these things up, and we're talking about 1,000 verse, give or take. The Quran actually has about 6,200 plus verses. So we're talking a big chunk of the Quran here. Okay. A big chunk. 600 of those deal at least with direct divine threat of punishment. Another 200 deal with warnings. And another 200 deal with generic, basically, derivatives of fear. And if you put it in the context itself and you begin to read the story itself that is talking about that, we're talking about 25 to 30%, almost 1/3 of the Quran has messages of threats and fear. And most of them are concentrated in the shorter verses, the so-called poetic ones that students at a very young age in Muslim schools are memorizing. And then you're asking this Muslim to leave Islam and follow Jesus, and you get frustrated why they didn't make a decision after meeting them twice at Starbucks. Come on, folks. Let's be real. All right? So here is the summary of what is the direct impact of these fear messages. It creates spiritual fear in the Muslim from being punished by Allah. Okay? It impacts the quality of their faith. They just want to please Allah. They don't care. Whatever he told them, they're okay with that. They're not going to question him. Okay? He knows best. It encourages the good deed work. Now, how many times you talk to Muslims about Christ and they get interested and then all of a sudden they become religious on you and they wear the hijab and they start going to mosque and memorizing the Quran because they're feeling afraid. That's why they're doing, it's like they want to accumulate good deeds. And it discourages the idea of critical thinking altogether and prevents them from seeking the truth. I mean, how many times you met a Muslim the first time and say, hey, please tell me the truth. Tell me about Jesus. I feel like I want to accept him. But just if they tell you that, that means it's been years of witnessing to them and they finally got it. Okay. The first meeting ain't going to go down that way. And that's why I encourage you to be the one who opens the door for that one way or another and trust that the Holy Spirit will convict him in their heart. It creates avoidance of having these spiritual discussions, hesitations of bringing it up. It even can have a reaction of hate towards you if somehow they get exposed because their cousin realized that they're talking to you and the government found out that they are with you. Like right now, there's a house church that I've been connected with that there've been a crackdown on that particular house church, and it created animosities and divisions in there, and one snitch on the other, and so on and so forth. Okay. And rejection, of course, of the message that you are sharing with, and the perception that somehow you're asking them to become idolaters, polytheists, becoming those despised and cursed Christians and Jews, okay? And you disown your family, become westernized, and so on and so forth. That's what they think by making that decision, all right? So not to mention, of course, the ramification of that, not only spiritual fear, but also socioeconomical loss, cultural identity loss, political fear, and so on and so forth. All right. And I'm going to keep going here. When it comes to the Gospels, you see similar things happening in there. You know, for instance, people who have illnesses, people who basically were demonically possessed, who are afraid of what's going on. Some, even when Jesus invited them to follow him, they have concern about financial security. Others have concern about physical security. Jesus warned them of what's going to happen to them, the disciples, loss of their reputation. People were afraid about losing their family, and so on and so forth. And Jesus gave them a choice, the cost of following him. I'm preaching from the Gospel of Matthew, by the way, Lord willing. And in there, I'll be talking about, I believe it's Matthew 10. We'll be talking about the cost of following Jesus, where your own family will turn against you. My own family, by the way, disown me, turns against me, and want nothing to do with me. My cousins mock me. The other day, my best friend and cousin, and almost like my brother, sent me a picture and says, this is how you used to look when you used to be a human being. Now, let your mind run with that. What does that mean? How does he view me today? Not a human being, obviously. All right? So, why do people, by the way, reject Christ? Well, John tells us in his gospel, that this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world. People don't like, by the way, the light to shine on their sin. Okay. So they look at you as a follower of Jesus and you're saying, oh, I accepted Jesus and all that kind of stuff. I'm not a sinner anymore. It's like somehow they look at you and say, really? Really? Is that how you feel? So they try to justify why they don't want to follow, basically. It's a sin problem. Okay. It's the idea that I want to cover my sin up. I don't want to admit that I am a sinner, okay? By the way, I've been doing a study on forgiveness. In order for you to forgive someone else, you have to surrender to God and admit that He's in control. Oh, how often do you want to do that? Yeah, best of luck with that. I know. So, in Jude, which is one basically chapter, verses 17 to 23, look what he says. Dear friends, remember what the apostles of our Lord Jesus Christ foretold. They said to you, in the last days, in the last time, there will be scoffers who will follow their own ungodly desires. I mean, we're experiencing it even at Amplify through social media, to be honest. I mean, I in social media, people come and mock my faith. If you respond to them, not mocking them, Facebook actually penalizes you and not them, even though they use profanity and things like that, just because how dare you stand up for them? We're living those days already, folks. All right. So I'm going to keep skipping all of these things. Now, this is one of my favorites. Those who practice evil hate Jesus for fear that their deeds will be exposed. Okay. Like imagine this. A teacher assigned his 4th grade students to write a topic sentence, one topic sentence for the following phrases. He said, Sam always works quietly. Sam is polite to the teacher. Sam always does his homework. The student topic sentence was, I hate Sam. Okay? That's how people react to you. I hate you. But the good news is, Jesus says they hate you for my name's sake. So don't take it personal, okay? We're hated for Jesus' sake, technically speaking. Now, let's keep going. This is Islam, folks. Islam in a nutshell, it's what the Quran teaches and what Allah teaches. It's what the Hadith of Muhammad taught and practiced. And it's also the biography of Muhammad and also the common teachings of the scholars. How often you deal with Muslims say, I'm going to go and ask my imam. Oh, so-and-so, who is a scholar in Quran, knows best than you because you don't know Arabic, right? Well, I'm an Arab. Well, still, you don't know the Arabic of the Quran. I did a PhD in that, where Allah knows the Arabic of the Quran. No matter how often you try to reason with them, there is always an excuse for that. Let me take another sip of my heavenly cup. So these are the Muslims you're going to be dealing with. You have the moderate Muslims. These are the majorities. I call them the silent majority. Then you have the moderate reformers who are a fraction and they can do a thing. They're the one who wants to present Islam as a liberal religion. They're even persecuted by moderate and ultra-conservative Muslims, okay? And then you have the ultra-conservative Muslims, the minority who run the show. They intimidate everybody else. They're the 7th century Muslims, all right? So that's the kind of Muslims you're going to end up dealing with. And once you deal with them, the good news is the majority of them you're going to deal with are moderate. But once you deal with them, you need to find out their background. Are they Sunni? Are they Shia? Which imam they follow? What type of school of Sharia they grow up under? Is it a moderate school? I should say conservative school. Is it a more liberal school? Is it a conservative school? I mean, and the list, goes on and on and on. And do they know anything about Islam in the first place? They would argue with you even though they know nothing about Islam. So sometimes you have to educate them on their faith itself. Let's keep going. Here is, by the way, an explanation of why we have reformers movements like Al-Qaeda and others like them. The Wahhabi movement that I grew up under, it's all a Salafi movement, taking it back to the 7th century Islam. They basically get disillusioned, these leaders who lead these movements, they get disillusioned by the fact that Islam is being corrupted, and they blame everybody else, of course, for that. It's impossible that Muslims corrupted it. They were influenced by others, and therefore they call for reformation. And then there is always civil wars, and there's fighting, and there's always crackdown on people who are not religious, technically speaking. Okay, now we want to close with these. I'm going to close in the next 2-3 minutes, and then I'll open it up to take a look at some of the questions I see some of you asking. This is the Muslim psychology. Allah is the only God. Islam is the final religion sent by Allah. Muhammad is his final messenger who brought that religion. The Quran is his final message. Okay? So that's the psychology of Islam. And you're asking him to leave the latest and the greatest to come to Christianity. Don't talk about Christianity as a religion. Talk about Christianity as a way to restoring a relationship that was lost with God. So focus on the relationship aspect of thing. This is another diagram that represents their understanding of world religions. Everyone was sent to a specific group except Islam, universal. Except Islam, that is universal. Okay? Muslims deny truth of the gospel. They deny the authority of the Bible because it's in their mind it's corrupt. They deny the one triune God. They claim we worship three gods. And they deny the way that Christ died to take away our sin, and that's the crucifixion. Other than that, it's wonderful. You know what I mean? So Muslims are communal people. So a one-on-one approach is best. Muslims are honor and shame culture people in general. You have to approach it that way when you share the gospel with them. And the fall, the story of the fall. Islam is an ideology, an identity. So Muslims, by the way, are victim of it, and you have to help set them free. Like, you know, in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3-5, we came to tear down strongholds and to set captives free. That's basically the argument that we want to use. And Muslims' objections to the gospel are based on lack of understanding. Our job is to fix their presuppositions and correct them for them. All right. And a couple of graphs and I'll stop. Here is a graphical representation of the psychology of Islam. This is the individual under all these pressures: cultural and social pressure, authority, threat from the authority and pressure, and the spiritual pressure from the God of Islam and disobeying him and the fear of what might happen to you. Here's the Muslim in the center, and he is in this cobweb, and you're asking him to leave all of that behind. Yeah, I'll be praying for you. And then here's the tensions. They are facing the system, going against the mainstream, and at the same time, the fear of separating. I mean, folks, Mother's Day is painful for me. Father's Day is painful for me. And you hear about Ramadan, it's painful for me. You hear about celebrations, painful for me, because I lost my family. Okay? But Jesus worth it all. Jesus worth it all. All right? So let me stop right here.
Amen, brother. Thank you, Al-Fadi, for sharing that. Lots of good practical information there for us.
Amen. So let's see if we have a question, maybe two. Someone is asking, I don't know if you can, yes, I can highlight it. How does one handle Muslims' hatred towards American and Israel? Well, now we're talking political stuff. You know, I would say you need to always ask that Muslim if they bring it up and say, you know what, please help me understand, what did America and Israel do to you, so that I can appreciate where you're coming from, because I get my information from my side. I want to hear your side. And then be sympathetic to that, and then talk to them and say, you know what, politics is messy. I agree with some of what you said. We don't know what's going on over there. We love anyone, any human being, because they're all made in the image of God, and share the gospel from that perspective. That's just my advice.
Right. Amen. You let me know if you see another one.
Yes, sir. I'm going to scroll up here. Somebody's asking about music. Yeah, I don't remember talking about music here. Yeah.
I think he was a Muslim.
Should there be a powerful? Yeah, okay. Well, it doesn't look like there's other questions. If anyone would like to ask right now, folks, please put a question here. We have at least maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes left. And if you have any questions of your own, brother, feel free to ask.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, this topic really hit home to me because, you know, since I started doing this, I tell people I'd rather talk to a Muslim than a Baptist. I am a Baptist. I don't, you know, have anything against Baptists. I just love talking to Muslims. But I've found that it's difficult. So what? Let's just say if you have a Muslim neighbor, what advice would you give to people as far as connecting with them and, you know, just initiating that relationship at the beginning?
Yep. I mean, it's difficult, brother, if they're not open to meeting with you, but you can always approach them as, especially if neighbors or classmates or coworkers, and say, hey, man, I would love to learn more about your culture. I hear things, but I don't like to be influenced by others. I like to learn from you. Would you mind going for coffee with me? Can you come to my home? You know, and by the way, I would love to invite you in my home, and I know that you focus on halal meat and things like that. Can you tell me where I can go and get this from? Or would you like to meet me at the place? I like to learn about you. I mean, just trying to do it this way, because what you're doing is you're giving him a different impression about Christians also, because they think Christians somehow hate them, they don't like them, they're against them. Now you're confusing them. They're like, wow, I've never seen Christians love me that much and care for me. You know what I mean? And oh my goodness, Muhammad, you shared just about your mother. Can I pray, for her healing? You'll be surprised, brother, how God uses prayers like this sometimes to show him the power of his name. That would be the approach I would advise. And if they're resisting, somehow they're afraid, they don't want to deal with you, just continue to pray for them, and the Lord will open a door, whether through you or through others.
Amen. I think a lot of times we jump straight to the intellectual side of things, and they have this emotional barrier, and we just need to give them something tangible and love on them a little bit, and then let them know that we care. So, yeah, I appreciate what you shared there.
Yeah. Well, it looks like Sister Corey here, or Brother Corey, I don't know. I'm assuming somehow saying, can I private message Al-Fadi? Oh, well, okay. Well, I don't know. You guys can decide on that. So, all right.
Maybe is there a contact form through your website, CIRA International, or anything like that?
People can go to our website, cirainternational.com. In there,
Okay.
you can connect with us, and it will send an email. It looks like they're having a family situation they're trying to run by me, so I'm always available. If it is something I can address, absolutely, I can do that. Or through Facebook, that's through my personal page, alfadi.cira. You guys can reach out to me that way.
All right. Well, Al-Fadi, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Sorry for the technical difficulties we had at the beginning.
It's my bad. Honestly, I feel so bad that you guys weren't able to watch the beginning, but many of the material I shared, you can find it on our channel, CIRA International, Dr. J. Smith channel, Founder Films, and we talk about it all the time, by the way.
Amen. All right. Well, brother, again, thank you for being with us today, and bless you and your ministry. We thank you for being with us, and pray that the Lord just continues to use you. And of course, we've already talked about your website, but if anybody would like to find out more information about you, they can go to CIRA International. And of course, we encourage you to go to ministrytomuslims.com, and let's continue to pray for our folks in Minneapolis.
Amen.
But until then, have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you, brother. Take care, guys.
Thank you.